Testing, 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 testing. Ada. Testing, 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 testing. Tes, tes, tes. Gambar. Oh, live lambat sikit dah.
So I speak here or here? Do I need to on here?
Think perlu on sini tak? On better on.
Okay.
Boleh.
Biasa memang itu
So it's okay. Yeah, I'm very well. Once again, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dr. Mahani, and also good afternoon to the head of the history section, Dr. Azmi, Arifin, Prof. Mahani, and colleagues, and also students who are here. A very good afternoon to all of you. It is a great pleasure to be here and going to share with you a small story about a small man. I don't know how small, how big he was, because we don't know which of the gentlemen was him that we have found. This man, Simon Sindurang Bulakang, is what I would consider a forgotten defender of Kadazan rights in colonial North Borneo. Now, we all know that in Sabah and present day, North Borneo will be called Sabah in East Malaysia. There is a group of people who are now known as Kadazan Dusun. But the name Kadazan has always invoked a lot of suggestions as to the origins of the name. But the people in this area where Simon comes from, Papar, have always known or rather called themselves as Kadazan. So this is something interesting as opposed to the other term, which is Dusun. So Dusun is the generic term in terms of the Dusunic language, the tongue that they spoken. Tetapi if you talk about the people in that area, they call themselves Kadazan. So you have the Membakput, Benoni, Penampang, part of Penampang, and so on, and Papar will be called Kadazan. So what I'm going to do essentially is to talk about this group of people who actually had a bit of problem with the colonial administration because when the Western enterprise began to come in, the colonial administration came in, there were changes, there were different challenges and so on. And to the Kadazan people or to the Dusun or Papar, their lands became the target of this kind of encroachment. So that it actually ended up with a law case, a very interesting law case that actually went later on to all the way to the House of Lords. And we talk a bit about Simon Sindurang. And basically, this talk is about how we historian, kita semua ni historians, right? So how we historians what are we supposed to do in trying to ensure that people like him can be salvaged from history, from oblivion, from being lost forever. So this is a small exercise. Since we are all in history department here, we are going to talk a bit about how we use official documents to get some views about this man. But at the same time, we can also use other non-official documents that will perhaps bring some new perspectives to us. And we also try to look at how a leader, a community leader, an indigenous community leader, try to operate during the colonial period, especially in trying to fight or resist the colonial initiatives. So this is what we are doing this afternoon, essentially an efforts at historiography a bit, and then to talk about sources. Yeah. So we don't have the title. Is it possible to make that bar, hilangkan that bar? Never mind, never mind. So this is basically an attempt to look at the key personality in this case, that is Simon, yeah? We're going to talk about Simon. And like I said, we are trying to rescue a forgotten community leader from the oblivion of history. Yeah.
Ini kan, Dato, ni kan?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah. Satu dunia sudah terang. Okay. Jadi, so I'm just trying to make some comparison between existing views, so the existing literature about the man, how they describe about him, and then how we can actually look at him again from official and non-official sources. So therefore, of course, this is also an effort to further understand, trying to understand the case that will remind us that when we do history, when we write history, when we research on history, we need to cast our net wider so that we can see things from a wholesome perspective. And of course, we talk about how this leader operated during the colonial period. Now, this is not something new. I have spoken about Simon many years ago, but I'm in the midst of writing up the book. So in the process, I also uncovered new materials that I've added on to this discussion. So this is what we are going to look at. How do I move? Okay, where is Papar? We are going to focus on this small town called Papar, which is, if you look at this map on the corner, left-hand corner, Simon came from Papar. So this would be the district of Papar. Around this area, this is Kota Kinabalu, and Papar is here. You can see Papar. And when you blew up this map, you will see that Papar actually has a long river. This river extended right deep into the heart of Sabah. And this river actually supported a large community of people, not just the Dusun or the Kadazan Dusun, but also, as you can see from this little picture here on the right-hand corner, these are your Dusun or Kadazan people. You can see their dress is always like that. But you can see that the lady in front would be a Muslim lady. She could be a Kedayan or she could be a Bajau. Because this part of the coastal area were basically inhabited by the Bajau people and also some Kedayan people as well. So the river extended from the interior all the way down here, and this plain here, the Papar settlement was started, and therefore it grew into a small town, and today it is quite a large district. Here, I would like you to just concentrate on this little church here, Holy Rosary Church at Lim Ba Hao. Holy Rosary Church. There is a Catholic church. Because when we talk about this story, we are going to talk about this church as well, and also the documents that came from that church. There is also another church somewhere in the heart of the town next to the railway, and this would be the St. Joseph Church. So there are two churches within 2 kilometers away, so very close to each other, right? So Papar is actually a very rich district. Very rich because it was the the rice bowl of Sabah. It actually planted a lot of rice, and so you can see macam Kedah lah, something like Kedah, Alostar area. You can see a lot of paddy fields and so on. And the Dusun people have been, or the Kadazan people, depending on how you want to call them, they live in this land for as long as they can remember. This was their ancestors' land, very rich land. You can see there are also agriculturists planting rice as their main activities. And you can see all the buffaloes and so on, quite nice pictures, 2 person on 1 buffaloes and so on. But you can see that this was a very rich community also because they own lands. They also produced rice on their own. So therefore, they have a very interesting ecosystem of rice production. So this is something interesting because you can see that they are also rich with buffaloes and things like that. So the Dusuns were always tied to the land. Therefore, the Orang Putih may have called them Dusun because they're all planting and so on. So, but that became an ethnographical term as well. So the Dusun people or the Kadazan people of Papar were very rich and they always depended on their land. This is a picture that was taken from Rosary Church or at Lim Ba Hao. So today, I took this picture. You can see that it is still very rich with paddy fields. This is still a very big rice producing area. Very nice place to be. I think I want to retire there. Now, to give you just now we saw a few ladies, but this is a picture taken in 1921. And they were putting up a show to welcome the Prince of Wales, who came to visit Masatu. So they all dressed up in their Kadazan dress. The people in in Papar, they are very different in terms of their costume. You can see their head, the head, the conical head is actually smaller, whereas in other areas it's actually broader. And you can see the women of Kadazan women, the Papar women, they always wear long sleeves, not short sleeve. We need to ask Christine there, do you have long sleeve or short sleeve? Long, Papa long, right? Now, how they become long and so on, one of the suggestions is that because they were exposed to the Roman Catholic Church very early, so I think they must have asked them to wear this. And also you can see that there is a white singlet or a white shirt in the middle. They always wear that as well. And they always hold a handkerchief. I think you can see many of them were holding a handkerchief. Again, maybe this is something introduced by the Roman Catholic Church. Again, we don't know because this is not our kajian, so not our research. So when we look into these people, they were very cultured. They have their own culture, they have their own costumes. And if you look carefully, the women actually wear something interesting, the belts. These belts are silver coins. Berat, no. Berat. Meaning to say they are rich. They are, well, maybe not, they're well-to-do. They have wealth. They can spend on silver belt. And these are now heirloom, very expensive. And all the butang-butang can be silver, can be gold as well. So interesting, this is a very, very well-to-do community. So These communities, the peaceful life somehow was broken by a very interesting development. The incoming of the North Borneo Company, or what we call the Chartered Company. So the North Borneo Company came in 1878, and then later on they were granted a charter, and then therefore they were called the Chartered Company. And therefore this Chartered Company grew from London, represented by a governor here with his own team of people ruling the state. So this state was carved out of certain concessions from the Sulu, from the Brunei, and so on. And this was the logo, the state emblem of the state. You can see that the hands, the two hands that held the lion of North Borneo flag, one hand orang putih with the baju, you can see that, and then the other one is a native hand, naked native hand. So this would be the North Borneo, and then the Kinabalu would be here and things like that. Now, the North Borneo Company was essentially a company. The government was a commercial chartered company receiving a royal charter. So, syarikat berpiagam yang mendapat piagam daripada kerajaan British, Parliament Britain. So, they rule over this country as a government, although they are commercial firm. So therefore, involvement in business, involvement in taxation, all this became very important to them. The issue of land became very important. Among the first laws that were introduced in 1881 was a land law. So there was the first land proclamation. And subsequently, there were land proclamation, different type of land proclamations. And each of the proclamations says that we must respect the natives' right. And in 1903, a new land proclamation was made in order, again, to protect the natives' interests, and also, very important, to issue individual title deeds. This is actually a very early attempt by a Western enterprise, a Western government, to give titles to individual land. Because before that, the lands of the people were customary, tanah adat. So tanah adat, how do you know this belong to you? How do you know this belong to that person? You have a bit of issue here. It's always the ketua or the orang tua who actually decided, you stay here, this is your boundary, and then next family, another boundary. But in 1903, the government said, this one cannot. We must demarcate. We must alienate the land so that everyone knows where their lands are and so on. So a title should be given. Now, if you look at that, that is actually very noble, very good for a Western enterprise to think of that. But the first few years, it was chaotic. It was very problematic to implement. First of all, there is a law. There was a law proclaimed. Two, there were attempts to make survey of the land so that they can measure this is the land belong to A, this is the land belong to B. But after they did the survey, the title grant tanah to be ready. But the locals couldn't understand what's going on. They said, you should come and collect your land title, pay the premium. What's that? For generations, I don't have to do that. Why should I do it now? A lot of lands are communally owned, like the burial grounds, common land, common grazing ground, tempat untuk binatang untuk makan rumput and so on. They're designated and so on. But when the company came, when the government came in 1903, when they started issue all this land title, they eat into some of this customary land, including the burial sites, because the burial sites have no signboard. Bukan macam ini adalah tanah berkuburan orang siapa. There's no signboard. no pagar and so on, no fences and so on. And therefore it became a problem because on the one hand, you have the Western way of understanding things. So you should have a pagar. If you don't pagarkan, nobody knows. So, and because of that, a lot of titles were not taken up. And in the process, those lands were being sold to the incoming enterprise. One, the railway. Two, rubber estates. They all came into this area. So the first problem was land proclamation. It was very good. It was actually the best thing that had happened. But somehow in the first few years of implementation, a lot of unclear areas happened. People just came in and took the land. And therefore, a lot of the lands were lost, including cemeteries and so on. So number two, colonial encroachment. Number two, the railways. Railways, a lot of people thought that the railway started in Jesselton, in KK, and then go up into the interior. No, the answer is no. The answer would be they started from Western, a small town in the Padas, end of Padas, to come out all the way down to KK, Jesselton, and then another way going up to interior. So I think this first picture here would be one of the earliest small train, just started and so on. And then in Papar, they built a bridge across the big river. And that bridge, when it was open, you have a big ceremony. It was open. And since then, if you are from Sabah, if you are from Papar, you will know that every day there will be a lot of the anyong, all the makcik with their head, with their basket. They will sell you eggs and also, the dumplings, the bak chang and so on, so that you can eat as you go onto your way. Those days when we take the train, we were very keen to wait for this to come to Papar. Why? We can eat all this nice food, So this actually started from very early times, and the traders were mainly Chinese. But you can see that this train stopped here. You can see that this land still a very rich land. But the land where the railway stood actually belonged many years ago to the Dusun people, to the Kadazan people. And when they were taken, no compensation, no nothing, and therefore it became an issue. Encroachment number three. Once the land were taken, it was sold to the rubber estates. And there were two major rubber estates, one Papar estate and then another one Mau estates. And these are 1,000 over acres of land. And again, they encroach into cemeteries, they encroach into private lands that were not planted and so on. A man may own 20 acres of land, but he may be only staying onto 1 or 2 acres of land. The rest may be just left empty. So you have a lot of fruit trees, this and that, but they were entered by the rubber estates because there was no markings, there were no titles for these people. It was later when the Dusun or the Kadazan people began to realize how important the titles were. They went all the way out to get the titles, but by then they have lost so much already. Talking about thousands of acres of land given to or sold to the rubber estates. So here you are, the rubber estates were actively planted because income became a very important part of the operation. And the governor also went and did his, do a bit of to open an estate, to official something. So the government was very much in favor of the rubber estates and so on. By the way, rubber was introduced very early in North Borneo, and Matt Ridley, H.N. Ridley, also had a hand in introducing rubber seeds to North Borneo. So he would be called father of rubber, not only in West Malaysia, but also in Sabah. I don't know about Sarawak. Okay, so the people were very angry, and therefore they made complaints. When they make complaints, these complaints were not entertained by the government, or at least brushed aside. And therefore, they went to the Roman Catholic Church. Now, this is interesting because the Dusun or the Kadazan of Papar became Christians very early, because some of the earliest Christian missions, Catholic mission, were started in Papar area. So you have not just in Papar, you also have other areas, Kanuti and a few other places where they had Catholic churches started. And therefore you had Catholic priests who are Europeans who came and worked among the people there. And with the help of the Roman Catholic Church, they make a petition to the government and to the British High Commissioner of Southeast Asia. That would be the governor of Singapore. So they actually make this when the High Commissioner was in Labuan. They went over to make a petition. And the government of Britain was sympathetic to these people because they said, look, you must respect the natives. Because the Royal Charter given in 1881 was already stated clearly that you can rule, but you must respect the natives, especially their lands. And therefore, he asked the government to answer to these grievances, to these charges. And the Kadazan people went on to engage an English lawyer by the name of R.B. Tunnell. R.B. Tunnell was a judicial commissioner. Before that, he resigned. He became the first private law practitioner in North Borneo. He had some issue and so on, and the case went to the court, and this was the longest case in Sabah before the war. Almost 100 days of hearing for a lot of people. So finally, the mixed result. The judicial commissioner, who was the judge, ruled that the government or the company have been wrong on point of laws, because they say that they have taken the land without consultation and so on, and therefore they have to pay compensation to the natives, to the Dusun people, on two types of compensation. One, the land. Two, all the plants, fruit trees. One durian tree would be like $10, or one mangosteen tree, $1. Different price for different fruits and so on. But the government was very angry because they said, you have durian tree all over the place. You mean to say they were planted by the Dusun? Or could it be a bird that dropped these seeds, and so on? So there were a lot of arguments, but the government said, or rather the court said, no, you got to compensate. But the court also said something very important. All the compensations can only be paid based on the price of what a native would sell to another native. It's not the commercial price. It's not like when you sell a piece of land for 3,000 on the commercial price. But if you sell it among the natives, it could be just 200 or 300 per acres and things like that. So the English lawyer said this is unjust, because this land are supposed to be commercialized already because you sold it to the rubber estates. So they wanted to appeal. The government said, if you want to appeal, you got to pay this amount of money, as a reserve, as a deposit. But the Kadazan people had no such money to pay, and therefore it was a problem for them. And then later on, the lawyer was chased out from North Borneo. So nobody to fight for them. But then there were other Englishmen who came and fought for them, including the Society for the Abolition of Slavery. and so they came and helped them, but this process dragged on and on until 1920. Throughout the First World War, 1914 to 1918, nothing happened because everyone was busy with the war. By 1920, when the House of Lords made a decision, the government said, no more case because we have won the case and so on. But there were very little that the Dusun people actually obtained in terms of compensation. So it was a very sorry case for the Dusun people. Now, let me just briefly talk about some of the points. Yeah, 6 points. One, the Dusun people were angry because they said, this is our land. We have been here since immemorial, time immemorial. But then when the land were taken, it was never consulted. They were never consulted. Number 3 is that the company cut down fruit trees on their lands, but did not pay compensation. Number 4, the rubber estates actually went into the cemeteries and they actually, just dig out all these jars because they bury their dead in jars. Tempayan yang besar, ya, bukan tempayan kecil macam ni, tempayan besar and so on. So they dug out and smashed them out, all the bones scattered and so on. So it was a no-no thing in terms of adat and so on. So then the chartered company also allowed the policemen to abuse their power by deliberately, when the natives or the Dusun have their own cows, they chase the cows into the rubber estate and then impound them, fine them. If you want to take back your cow, you must pay a fine. No? So it's like deliberately doing it so that they get a share of the fines and so on. And finally, when the Dusuns went to the government and said, please help us to address this, the government at that time, the district officer, E.A. Barut, they said he couldn't be bothered and he was alleged to be drunk. Dikatakan sudah mabuk and so on. And therefore he could not do anything and so on. So the Dusun people were very angry. Okay, we come to our hero, Simon. Simon, in the documents, official documents have always been saying that everything about this case was brought on by Simon. Simon Sindurang Bulakap, his name. And he was suspected to be very closely associated with the Roman Catholic Church. After all, his name is Simon, already Christian. Then Owen Rutter in 1922, if you are familiar with the history of Sabah, you will need to read these 2 books. Owen Rutter and K.G. Tregoning in 1965 said that this guy, terrible, and he was disliked by the government. But in the documents, so much information about him. But when we went and asked his family, do you know your great-grandfather have done this? No. No records, no recollections whatsoever. So we busybody went and asked more questions, right? So Simon, I'm trying to get an image of Simon. So it's the same picture just now. Can this be Simon? Or could this one? I don't know, right? I have another picture which I couldn't find in my record because it came from another set. It's in a form of a lantern. And I think that's Simon. But then again, it has no caption, so I don't know whether that's true. But enough to say that let's keep this image, either one of them, in your head and say, this would be Simon. Boleh? Right? Simon, tall guy, not small guy. Right? This was what I found. So Simon Bulakang. Right? Bu Akang, because I think the guy, the mason yang buat tulisan tu miss out L, tak tahu baca ke whatever. Okay, so this was shown to me by the great grand niece of Simon Sindurang, who works for the church. Dia kata, di situ. So I went and see, tak jumpa. Mungkin hantu sudah cover my eyes, So I went back to her. She brought me out and said, there, just in front of you. Okay, so this was what I found in the cemetery behind the church. Yeah. This is the only real thing about Simon Sindurang yang kita nampak, which is a bit more physical. He came from this village called Gopinpinan. You know that place, Krishna? So Gopinpinan is among very near to each other, to the church, to everything. The kampung is still there. And I think the family, I'm not sure if they still own the land there. Okay, if you look into official existing narratives, Simon was not mentioned too many times. But usually in the official documents, they always say the notorious chief instigator. Do you know the word notorious? Yang nakar. Okay. Chief instigator, orang yang mengapi batu api besar. Boleh tak kita guna batu api besar? So he was the chief instigator. Because the government said it was him. He'll go and, api-apikan. And everyone came out and protest. Governor Pearson said, Simon really represents the Roman Catholic mission. He was exploited by the mission, by the Christian priests. That was what Governor Pearson said in one of the documents. And the government also, in part of the document, said that Simon and friends maybe will stage an uprising. Mungkin akan memberontak. So that was what was said, involving all the Dusun communities, because he did not just work in Papar. He went around West Coast, the whole of West Coast, cari semua yang Dusun yang hilang tanah, come and protest. So memang betul lah, he was a notorious chief instigator. According to Pearson, Simon's documents was couched in vague terms and largely made up of alleged grievances of unnamed persons in various districts. Dia kata, dia ni mengatakan semua ni, all these people have grievances, ada masalah dengan government because of their land, but no names. Just this guy, that guy, this guy, and so on. Ada case ini. Very vague. The government said we cannot accept a vague case, Then, interestingly, Pearson also said Simon appeared to have nothing to say about himself. Maksudnya, he did not fight for himself, but a great deal of speaking on behalf of other people. Maksudnya, dia hanya berjuang untuk orang lain, not for him. Interesting. So he was quite a leader in some ways. And because of what the government said, because of what the government thought, was thinking at that time, and his action, can we say that this was the beginning of Kadazan Dusun consciousness? I'm not sure. Maybe this is something that those of you who are interested may want to go and pick it up. Because what happened was, Simon and his friends, a few other Banjars and so on, you can see some of their names here later on. They actually went along the railway all the way up to Tuaran to ask these people, protest. Let's collect the money, give to the lawyer, and let him fight the case for us. So that was the efforts made by Simon and his friends. So other than Papar area, which consists of Papar, Bongawan, and Membakut, all along the railway, the petitions were sent from other areas to the government. So in 1913, Sir Arthur Young, the Secretary of State bermaksud Menteri Luar Britain, right? He said, he was surprised by the latest development. At first, it was only petition from Papar. Now you have petition from Putatan, Kinarut and Kimanis area. And of course, the Tuaran people did not join. They did not join. The northern part did not join. And we also got to know that the petition from Putatan was signed by Mamidal and the Kinarut by Masagal, Makar, and also Majarit. And Kimanis by Pambahan and also Bangon. Papar was by Simon and Banja. Interesting. So that would be the official dimension, and also a bit about how this may be a Kadazan consciousness. I would want to understand more about the man, so I look around and I look at other sources. So we have other non-official sources. One, diaries, maybe memoirs, church records. Church records is interesting, yeah, because we are not looking at just church, tetapi simpanan, all the religious bodies. Like for instance, the mosque will have records, the church have records, the temples also have records. So you go to Ku Gongsi, they have tons of records, original documents that they kept. Some of them are already getting worse and so on. So there are a lot of efforts to safeguard, to rescue these documents. But my idea is that we should look at broader records. Another case is G.C. Woolley. G.C. Woolley was a land officer, land commissioner, and I had the privilege of working on his diaries. We produced 4 volumes of the diaries from 1901 to 1926. So we did annotations for each of these names and things like that. And also church records, etc. And all these records actually came out with new perspectives or new look about Simon. So this is interesting, at least for me. So let's start with G.C. Woolley. So this diaries, as I mentioned, it was published by the Sabah Museum because it was given to the Sabah Museum. So he was the acting land commissioner. G.C. Woolley's brother is a name of an archaeologist that you should know, Sir Leonard Woolley, who discovered the city of Ur in Mesopotamia. So came from a very interesting family, Woolley. So he came out here in 1901. On the day he went on the ship, it was a Japanese ship, he started his diary. Every day he writes something. So we got hold of the diaries, and we actually managed to see that in 1911, a lot of the entries were actually about the land case. So according to the diaries, Woolley found Simon to be very influential. And also the Dusun also refused to discuss the case unless Simon was present. So they want to listen to his idea. And Woolley was assisted by Simon and Banja in determining what kind of encroachments that you are talking about, what are the damages and so on, so that the government can pay out compensation in terms of trees and things like that. And interestingly, Woolley's diary confirmed many of the allegations. Maksudnya, the Dusuns were right in making the claims, you know. He also confirmed that the government was actually creating a myth of a possible uprising to be instigated by Simon. Maksudnya, there's no instigation, but the government decided to think like that there should be one, there will be one uprising. Ada pemberontakan. Ini kepercayaan from the government side. It's not real. Woolley said this was not real, and this came from his diary. So here you have a diary telling us a different story, giving us another dimension of Simon. So Simon was a leader. Simon was not fighting the government, just complaining. He was complaining, not uprising, no uprising. The Catholic Church. Just now we saw this baju. This was an event in 1918. The Roman Catholic Church, they have Dusun girls from Papar in national costume. So you can see this one lagi kaya. Dua tiga baris of the coins, right? So interesting. And you can see that these were two nuns, Catholic nuns, sitting there. So these girls are from, I think, from Penampang. They are much more modern. They dress in modern dresses, but the Papar girls were in traditional dress. Interesting. The Roman Catholic Church was accused by the government of supporting Simon, to instigate Simon, influencing Simon, and so on. So the churches, first it was St. Mary's. At that time, it was called St. Mary's. Later on, changed the name to Holy Rosary Church. That was in Limbahau. And then the other church was St. Joseph's Church in town. Two names, two priests came to our attention. Number one, Bernard Kurz, Father Bernard Kurz. He was there from 1889 to 1905. And when he passed away in 1905, Father Antonison Gusen came in 1905 and moved on. If you read the church record, you find that Kurz used the word kadazan from day one. But Gusens decided to use dusuns instead. So this is interesting, the way they look at things, yeah? And both of them left behind writings that we got to see. Okay, let's talk about Father Kurz. A lot of words here, but basically this was a letter by Kurz to his boss on the 15th of June, 1889. He said, in the beginning, there was this man who came to the church. He lived 3 miles away. He came in to ask for some instruction, wanted to learn about the church. But I think he wanted money. That was what the priest was saying. And I don't expect him to become a Christian. This was what Kurz said. But later, when he spoke to him again about the teaching of Christianity, about God's judgment, last judgment, etc., he seems to be very, very serious about the thing. And he started to cry. Then he said, "Ya, Tuan, sekarang saya percaya." This is the way they constructed the Malay word. "Sir, I do believe now." Everyone else was quiet except this guy. And this guy, his name, Simon Sindurang. But at that time, his name was Sindurang Bulakang. No Simon yet. So then later on, few days later, he came to the priest. He came to see Kurz and say, "Please help my child. He's sick. Please baptize him, make him a Christian so that he won't go to hell." That was the idea. So he baptized the boy who became Joseph Bulakang, and the father, that's Sindurang Bulakang, became Simon Sindurang Bulakang. So you can see, before their baptism, they were called Benait Bulakang, Sindolang Bulakang. Now they are called Joseph Bulakang, Simon Sindurang Bulakang. So this happened in 1889. Came from a letter, personal letter of a priest. And this letter is found not here, but in London. So kena pergilah cari-cari ni, you know. Okay. Simon and the church, after he became a Christian, he became a church leader, a lay leader. Bukan priest, tetapi membantu priest lah. And later he married. He was a widower. He had a few children, but he was a widower. And he married this lady called Agnes Ampok in 1891. And we got the record from the church marriage registry. And then Later on, he helped the church to become a catechist, assisting the priests and so on. But interestingly, he was also known to be a landowner who had hired other people to do the work for him, and he went and do church work. So meaning to say he was able to become independent. And he was close to Father Gushens and gave his address. When he wrote the petition, the address was Care of Roman Catholic Mission in Jesoten and Papar. Meaning to say his connection dengan church itu sangat rapat. So there is no question about that. In 1965, KG Tregoning, Professor KG Tregoning, daripada University Malaya, Singapore, wrote a book, and he said that the Roman Catholic Church was involved in instigating the Dusun people. And in 1982, Father John Rooney, a priest, said, no, the church was not involved, right? The church was not involved. So they went into a big of hoo-ha and so on. But when we found later a letter between Gushens and the lawyer Turnell, it confirmed the church's role, or at least Gushens' role. So in a letter dated 24th of June 1914, written from London to Father Gushen by Turnell, he said, how is it that I cannot hear from you? Important matters are now in hand. I feel quite isolated without a word from you or from our Dusun friends for whom I have gone through so much. So the lawyer said, hey, friend, how come you don't say anything? So this is where the church involvement, or at least Gushen's involvement, is confirmed. Because this is another letter that came from Turnell to Gushen's. And later, actually, Turnell, during the First World War, served in the army. And after the army, he came back to his law practice, and he died in 1952 due to a suicide. Not because of anything, but due to a suicide. We have yet to investigate more about the man, but he's an interesting man, to say the least. Another source, and all these sources are telling us that Woolley said Simon was influential, supporting the notion that Simon was actually a leader, and also confirmed that Simon was the one who actually batu apikan the whole thing and get the people to move. And that we can also see from the church record that he was very single-minded in pursuing his goals, and that he was also strongly influenced by the Roman Catholic Church. So he was not just nakar, but he was also very human, actually. You can see many dimensions of humanistic behavior is also coming out from all these documents. And we also learned that he was actually a very able operator. He knows how to operate. So this is interesting. This is just a glimpse of when we look at colonial era, we see a lot of people fighting the colonial masters in Dutch, East Indies, in Philippines, in everywhere. But how did they operate? How they get support? Interesting. We should actually investigate more. But we know that Simon actually knew how to use the official channel. He went and engaged lawyer. I mean, this is something that the British said you should respect the rule of law. Fine, we will respect the rule of law. We will engage a lawyer, right? So this is, of course, the Western, the church influence and so on. And he was able to move beyond Papar area and link up with other Dusun people. So again, it could be an ethnic or national consciousness. And the word nation is a bit tricky here, but nonetheless, there is a race or ethnic consciousness. We are all Dusun. We are all facing the same problem, and therefore, let us fight. So that's interesting. Those are the basic elements of the people's consciousness. He was, to operate, you must have money, you must have free time, you don't have to work, Well, he basically was financially viable. I asked the grandniece how much land he owned. He said 20 over acres of land. At that time, rich man. He was rich. He was able to support his activities without having it to jangkut or to do all this work. But he was also exposed to Western education. That is, he did not get a lot of education, but he knew that these are valuable things to learn. And therefore, the children and subsequently grandchildren all school in the Western tradition. So this is something interesting to consider. Let me just conclude by saying that because I said that this afternoon we are just talking about some materials, some sources, and so on, we should actually, as historians, should cast our net wider. We should actually look at more possible sources other than the official sources, right? And I think we should also interrogate. I think you are all students of 410, right? So you took 320 also. So you have this idea about interrogating sources. So you interrogate these sources carefully by comparing with other sources. So you need to have a closer reading to look for other perspectives, maybe. So by doing this work, we can see that our understanding of Simon are now enhanced or bertambah. Right? So instead of just believing that he was being a notoriety or notorious guy, as the official document said about him, now we say that, hey, actually Simon was very human also. And not only that, he was actually a leader in the church and also very focused in his work and maybe a pioneer in fighting for Kadazan rights at that point of time. And maybe we can also learn a bit about his method of operation as I suggested just now. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, for Dato Wong Danny Wong Zaki. A very interesting piece of work, and I'm very impressed by the new finding by the non-government reports. Okay, so you show that the other perspective about assignments, so it's totally different to the official reports that maybe seems too biased because these people just put them. Okay, and now I will open the Q&A session. Anyone you can ask the question. You can still ask in Malay, don't worry about that. Okay, please anyone. Better? What's it okay?
Belajar dulu.
Okay, silakan.
Thank you very much, Prof. Denny. Interesting, yeah. At least, as a student, as lecturer, we have a view how we can utilize history sources. Just not much related with your topic. Just ask for your view. If you can see, if we go, we trace the history of this Sabah, the protest movement in Sabah, we can see there is a special, like continuous, there is a group lead by different ethnic and religion. It's happened during for them to be on give their right and protect to the especially the northern chapter, the company. So can you please elaborate some why this kind of movement is special here in Sabah, and are they like much related with each other? Because once it happened, perhaps another group also following their protest movement or something like that. Any related?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Koo. Actually, if you look into the history of Sabah, I do agree with you. From day one, you can find that the resistance movement against colonial rule, against the North Borneo Company, was already in place. So you can see that right from the beginning, there were issues about rights over in Gomantong caves, where you have the Bulutupi head or Pangeran Sama being killed by Pryor and his team. Then later on in Kawang, later on in Pandasan, and also you all remember this guy called Mat Saleh and so on. Then subsequently, there were so many other resistance, some in a very large manner, big fight. Mat Saleh lasted 6 years. This was a very long time and nearly bankrupted the company. And in 1915, the last big one, Rundum Rebellion. And later, interestingly, this case, there was no such what we call, there was no violence, there was no fight, there was only petition and law cases. So this would be a slightly different kind of protest. But most of the protests would ended up in bloodshed. And later, if you remember, in 1943 October, there was an uprising by the people of Jesoten against Japanese rule. So we have the Kinabalu guerrillas story and so on. And interestingly, that uprising would be a multiracial uprising, and therefore it is now recognized as one of our important legacy of coming together. Mat Saleh rebellion was much more, it was multiracial, but then not that multiracial, because most of them were forced to join him. So there was this idea that it was not very multiracial, but still it was important. But if you can see the trend, it's always a question of something to do with traditional leadership, traditional rights vis-a-vis the incoming of a foreign power, a Western power. So you find that when the chartered company came, it came with all these rules saying that this one belonged to the state. The guy said, all along, it has been my family. How come it's now yours? Right? So you cannot understand each other. So the communication issue here, the understanding, comprehension became a problem. You talk about Mat Saleh. Mat Saleh was a chieftain. Now he had to actually subject himself to the company rules. Why should I be, my influence, my area, now you're coming in, you ask me to pay taxes and so on. So obviously there were a lot of clashes in terms of culture, civilization, and so on. But more importantly is the inability to understand one another, and also the efforts to protect the old tradition, the ancient regime, the old regime. And here you have the new Western power coming in. So this, I think that actually caused the reason, part of the main reasons why there were a constant uprising or fight resistance against North Borneo Company. At least until 1915, because after 1915, you don't find too many of these cases anymore. Maybe by then, everyone could understand that this would be the government. There was no more traditional government as in the past. So all these new government, the so-called old traditional government, are now part of the Western system as well, including the native law, native court, are now subsumed under the civil law of the government introduced by the British. So by 1915, all this had become sort of normalized in a way. So I think the resistance was very much like that because of this clash of civilization. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Wong and Dato. Anyone else? Yeah, Dr. Nabila. very still here. Parents come to us to it's now that Simon was influenced by the priest of the church, for example. So, to what extent that the priest sees the colonialism, to what extent they agree and see, because they also started benefiting from the urban network. And if you actually urban network came to the priest, where do you want that?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question. Basically, when I say that he was influenced by the church, maybe the government said that he was used by the church and things like that. Now, the church, this is interesting. One has to understand what are the churches. It's not one church. They are churches. So first, just now, you can see I put down the name Roman Catholic Church. So that is Catholic Church. So if you come to Penang, you see a church in Bukit Mertajam, you see St. Anne's Church. That would be your what we call your Catholic Church. So the Roman Catholic means that the top is the boss over the church. But you also have other churches, like for instance, maybe St. George Church, maybe some of these churches would be called Anglican Church or Church of England. So they represent the officialdom, the official church of the government. So if you go down to Kuala Lumpur, there is a church at the Dataran Merdeka, a very small church. You notice that will be the St. Mary's Cathedral. That is actually a Church of England. And therefore, it could have a very prominent place in the heart of the city, next to the government office. So, privilege in that sense. Roman Catholic Church, most of the priests were from south of Germany, Tyrol area. And they are not very happy about the English church also. So there were some form of frictions or the way they look at each other in a bit of animosity at that point of time, because one body representing the official view, that means the Church of England, another group belonging to another group. And many of these priests were also of Dutch descent as well. So this is interesting, you know. So the friction between the church and the official of the government are very real at that point of time, but they are undercurrent. They are not something that they come out and fight. It's always undercurrent, using a third party or things like that, over issues and so on. So this is a very interesting development that got to be studied further. Interesting part to look into. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. And yeah, it's I have no problem.
Hello.
So, actually, I have no questions, but I just want to express a gratitude and thank you so much, Mom. Because of this sharing knowledge about my hometown itself. Actually, I'm from Papar, so, but I don't even know about the historical in Papar, and yeah, because tiada siapa-siapa yang macam mau kasih tahu apa what is happening. So through your sharing, Prof, I'm really feel grateful and know about the historical, because yang tempat tadi dokter share kan, dia actually tidak jauh dari rumah saya, around 5 minutes. So meaning to say, sekeliling itu macam dia tempat bersejarah. So for me, I'm so happy and I'm feel grateful to you. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Christine, for these kind words. Yeah, but you are in Nagapas, you said.
In Swat Rampasan.
Swat Tampasan. Yeah.
Around 5 minutes.
Yes. Yes. Sekarang the Gereja, if you go up the Gereja in Limbahau, it has the tomb. Some of the grave of Gushan is there. So dia punya grave is there. But we are not sure whether it's an empty grave or just a batu peringatan, because we can't remember where he died actually. But interestingly, if you are interested, Anthony Sen Gushen also contributed a dictionary, one of the first dictionaries of Kadazan words in the Journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Aesthetic Society, Jembras. So you can actually go and see the words, you go and check whether it's correct or not, because the priests, many Christian organizations of the early times actually responsible in building the knowledge base, knowledge basics, or the foundation of many languages. So, for instance, the Hakka people in China, the Hakka, you know, some of our Chinese friends are Hakkas. The first dictionaries were all done in Switzerland, in Basel, the city of Basel, because they pick up the language. They said we must teach this language, and therefore they constructed this. And therefore the priests like Gushens, they actually built these dictionaries and so on. They help to build the foundation of the culture. Interesting. Just now we talk about the baju kan. So whether the baju is actually an influence of the Catholic Church, because in Penampang they are sleeveless. So maybe they said that's not nice to show too much of this flesh, and therefore they have this long sleeve and the white shirt and the white handkerchief. You know, interesting. This is again how this manifested in terms of influence is something that we can actually do. But you are welcome to do more about Papar, right?
Thank you, Prof. Yeah, you maybe can, she can continue the study and do a master about this topic.
Good.
So I have one question for you, Prof. It's in terms about how you get these non-official sources. You said that Woolies diary and also church records and also correspondence. Where the location of these records, and is there any problem during your research to get this kind of sources?
I think we are historians. Historians work on a few, not principles, but a few certain skills that you got to have. One of them is that you put yourself in this case. This is a land case, you know. This is a case involving land. So you got to learn about, during that period, who was the land officer. So you got to find out. Then suddenly you found, hey, it was G.C. Woolley. And Woolley is known to have a diaries, Khazanah di Museum Sabah, because he was the one who donated most of his collection of weapons, everything that helped to build the museum. Right? So we have this little knowledge, and then we say, oh, he was there, and therefore his diaries would have, or perhaps may have, certain information. So that's the first clue. Two, because he was accused of working with the church, surely the church have some records. So I said, who were the priests and things like that. So we carilah. Then finally we found out, oh, Father Kurz, Father Gushen. So mana bahannya? Then we found out that actually all the priests, every month, every now and then, they write a report back to London, to their mission in London. So I found out, oh, St. Joseph Mission. Where was it? North of London. So pergilah when we have this opportunity to go to the PRO, to go to the National Archives, we carilah 2 hari pergi sana. And then suddenly when the 2 hari jadi 1 minggu, because bertimbun, you know, so much of materials and things like that. And therefore it was, the cursed letter was found there, and I was reading through it and I felt, wow, it's interesting. So I actually, then Father Rooney, who retired from Sabah, was still alive when I went to that mission. So I talked to him. He said, no. You know, the church was never involved. Then I keep quiet. I don't want to say too much because he was already very old, you know. Then I went back to Sabah and I went to the church. They said they have archives in the church, in diocese office in Penampang. So I went to ask them, I said, can I have a look at your sources? Then I looked at the catalog, found the letter from Tunnel to Gushan.
Expressing.
Yeah, so you find that. So that was from another source. So you asked about church records. To work with church records, of course, you need the permission of the bishop, the hierarchy, and so on. So I asked permission, and they were very kind to me. So I went and read, and I sat at the Limbah for, I don't know for how long, 2 weeks, I think, sitting through every page and so on.
You document in English?
Many in English, many in English. Even with the some of the forms are actually in Latin, but then the entries were all in English, so it was easy for us to read. Yeah, and interesting, but they are not easy to be accessible because these are personal records, marriage records, baptism records, death records, and things like that. So basically, you got to get permission, get permission to do that, and so on. So I was very fortunate they allowed me to read that, and I learned a great deal for that, and also learned about how the churches operated during the early days. The confrontation between church people, the priests, and also the pagans. At that time, Sindurang Bulakang was a pagan. So that kind of confrontation, that kind of encounters are very interesting for me. So I learned something from that as well. So as you learn, as you read through the lives of people, you can also start thinking about the larger issue of encounters, about how they work and things like that. So basically, quite a rewarding kind of story. Then I was trying to find out more about the lawyer Turner. I'm very sorry that I couldn't show you a photo. Very handsome man. I had his photographs. I even have his death certificate. That's why I know he actually died of suicide. Actually,
Who's that?
yes. He was single. He was never married. Yeah, I even went to his old house in Ealing Broadway in London. Ealing Broadway. So I went there. Of course, the house had been sold many years ago, but it's a beautiful house, and a lot can be found. I found out about his military service. He was a gunnery officer, and then he was. I also found that he practiced law after the war in London area until 1952. And he also was a member of the racing club. So he was a colorful man, interesting man, and he was a churchman also, Church of England. So not the Catholic Church. Yeah. So it's that kind of search. And when I wanted to find out about his death, I went and searched under the registry of death, found his name, asked for a copy, paid £7 for it, and I got a copy. Yeah, because you can do that for research purposes and so on. So it's interesting. For me, it has been a very interesting journey. This is a part of a book that I hope to produce, hopefully in the next 2 years, about this case. I have already published a few papers on this case, a bit here, a bit there, including one in the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies. But I think it's time to wrap up the story lah. So I'm going to write a small book about this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Yeah. Okay, now we in the Q&A session, very interesting. So for the student, you can hear that, how important the sources is. Okay, from the sources, the new sources, you can get a new perspective, new angle, so that we not straight to the one document only. Okay, so as a student, yes, that's all. No sources, no story. Okay, thank you. Now kita ada materi untuk sedikit singgah hati lah untuk ya. Betul. perkongsian yang sangat menarik. Tajuk ni pun saya tertarik dan saya sangat tertarik dengan cara sungguh-sungguh itu didapatkan. Memang sangat menarik.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih.
Jadi saya mempersilakan Dr. Hasmi untuk menyampaikan cenderung hati kepada Prof. Denny.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Terima kasih.
Okay, kita dah selesai. Jadi kita boleh bersurat. Saya akan bawa Prof ke rawatan bilik akhir.
Ya.
Dan itu mungkin Dr. Ku boleh ambil gambar sekali.
Ya.
Dan mungkin boleh ambil gambar semua sekali tu. Macam mana cara dengan ramai?
Kita boleh duduk sana. Dan lepas tu ada yang boleh duduk, ada yang boleh berdiri.
Okey.
Kita berdua.
Tengah-tengah. Oh, nak pergi 2 orang.
Thank you.
Tengah-tengah ya. Di belakang.
Kita duduk sini.
Okey. Tunggu, silakan.
Ya, tak pukul. Macam cerita.
Ini pasal yang saya
Satu, dua, tiga. 1, 2, 3. Satu, 2, 3. Yeah, so next time don't talk
Bisa mau master.
Oh, I don't have my card.
Bisa mau master.
Don't have my card here. GANNY.
This one,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I take that one.
Okay,
Thank you.
welcome, bye.
Lang.
Oh, kampungnya, Pak.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You are only teaching.
I know, I'm a student.
Student.
Student from Dato Money.
Okay. Look very good.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, yeah, thank you very much.